The amber glow of dawn hadn't yet touched the horizon when Delilah Porter awoke to the acrid smell of smoke and the terrifying crackle of flames. Her eyes flew open to a nightmare her covered wagon, her only home since leaving St. Louis 3 months ago, was being devoured by hungry flames against the star-strewn Wyoming sky of 1876. "No!" she screamed, scrambling from her bedroll which she'd laid outside due to the unusually warm September night, a decision that had inadvertently saved her life. Delilah watched in horror as everything she owned in this world disappeared before her eyes, the wagon's canvas cover collapsing in a shower of embers that rose like fireflies into the darkness. The nearest town, Wilcox, Wyoming Territory, lay 15 miles east. She'd stopped to rest her oxen before making the final push tomorrow. Now, as she stood barefoot in her nightdress, her chestnut hair tumbling loose around her shoulders, tears streamed down her dirt-smudged face. 23 years old and utterly alone in the unforgiving wilderness, Delilah Porter had never felt more forsaken. "Madam, you hurt." The deep voice startled her so badly she nearly fell backwards. A tall figure on horseback materialized from the darkness, silhouetted against the burning wreckage of her wagon. "Stay back," she warned, reaching for the small pistol she kept tucked in her boot only to remember her boots were in the wagon, along with everything else she owned. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion. As he stepped into the light of the fire, Delilah could see he was young, perhaps 25, with a weather-beaten face beneath his wide-brimmed hat. His clothes were dusty but well-kept, and his eyes, reflecting the flames, held no malice. "Name's Yates Lawson," he said, keeping his distance and his hands visible. "Ranch hand at the Double Creek 'bout 5 miles north. Saw the fire from the ridge where I was camped." He gestured toward the burning wagon. "Mighty sorry about your trouble, madam." Delilah straightened her spine, dignity being the only possession she had left. "Delilah Porter," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I was bound for Wilcox." Yates Lawson surveyed the devastation with a practiced eye. "What caused it?" he asked, circling the wagon carefully. "I don't know. I sleep outside when the weather permits. Thank God I did tonight." She hugged herself against the pre-dawn chill, suddenly conscious of her state of undress. Noticing her discomfort, Yates shrugged off his coat and offered it to her without comment. The simple kindness nearly undid her composure, but Delilah accepted it with a nod of thanks. "Everything I own was in that wagon," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Everything." Yates Lawson stood quietly for a long moment, watching the flames begin to die down as they consumed the last of the wooden wagon. His next words would change the course of Delilah Porter's life forever. "Then I'll build you a better home," he said simply. Delilah's head snapped up. "I beg your pardon," the cowboy's expression remained earnest. "Got a small cabin on the edge of Double Creek land. Built it myself but never quite finished it. Was planning to sell it someday." He gestured toward the burning wreckage. "Reckon you need it more than I do right now." "Mr. Lawson, I couldn't possibly, just until you figure things out," he interrupted. "Can't leave a lady stranded in the wilderness. Wouldn't be right." Delilah stared at him, trying to discern his intentions. In St. Louis, such an offer from a strange man would be scandalous at best, dangerous at worst. But this wasn't St. Louis, and the rules of civilization seemed as distant as the city itself. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Yates Lawson looked genuinely perplexed by the question. "Out here we help folks in trouble. It's how we all survive." He gestured toward the horizon. "Sun'll be up soon. Nothing more to be done here. Best we get moving before it gets too hot." Delilah hesitated, weighing her limited options. She could wait for another traveler to pass by unlikely on this rarely used trail. She could attempt to walk to Wilcox 15 miles in bare feet with no water or provisions. Or she could accept the help of this stranger who, despite his rough appearance, had kind eyes and had made no threatening moves. "I have nothing to offer in return," she finally said. "Not asking for anything," he replied. "Just doing what needs doing." As the first rays of sunlight crept over the eastern hills, Delilah Porter made her decision. She would go with Yates Lawson to this cabin he spoke of, rest, and then figure out how to rebuild her life from the ashes of her wagon. Little did she know that from those ashes would rise not just a home, but a love stronger than any she had ever imagined possible. The journey to Double Creek Ranch was conducted mostly in silence. Yates had insisted Delilah ride his horse, a magnificent chestnut gelding named Rusty, while he walked alongside, leading the animal by its reins. "I'm perfectly capable of walking, Mr. Lawson," Delilah had protested. "Not barefoot you aren't," he corrected himself. "Besides, Rusty here needs the practice with a lady rider. Gets too used to my ugly mug." Despite her circumstances, Delilah found herself smiling at that. As they traveled, she took stock of her rescuer. Yates Lawson moved with the easy grace of a man accustomed to hard physical labor. His broad shoulders tapered to a trim waist, and though he wasn't overly tall, perhaps 5 feet 10 inches, there was a solidity about him that suggested strength and reliability. "How long have you worked at Double Creek?" she asked, breaking the silence as they crested a small rise. "Going on 4 years now," he replied. "Started as a hand, worked my way up to foreman last spring." "That's impressive," he shrugged. "Old foreman took a bullet in a saloon fight. I was the only one sober enough to organize the cattle drive that week." "Guess Mr. Hargrove figured that counted for something." "Is he a good employer, Mr. Hargrove?" "Fair man. Pays on time, doesn't dock wages for honest mistakes." Yates glanced up at her. "And you, Miss Porter, what brings a lady like yourself to Wyoming territory alone?" Delilah hesitated. Her reasons for leaving St. Louis were complicated and painful. "I'm to be the new school teacher in Wilcox," she said instead, which was true enough. "The position comes with a small house, I'm told." "School teacher," Yates repeated, sounding impressed. "Town's been waiting on one for months. Children running wild as jackrabbits. You know Wilcox well. Well as anyone. It's where we do our trading, banking. Not much to it, general store, saloon, hotel, church, sheriff's office that doubles as the jail." "And now a school," Delilah added. "And now a school," he agreed with a smile that transformed his weathered face, making him appear younger and almost boyish. They fell silent again as the terrain grew more rugged. To their right, a creek wound its way through the landscape, bordered by cottonwoods and willows. In the distance, Delilah could see cattle grazing on the autumn-brown grass. "That's Double Creek," Yates explained, following her gaze. "2 branches join up about a mile yonder, hence the name. Ranch house is just past that ridge. And this cabin you mentioned, other direction. Southeast corner of Hargrove land, about 4 miles from the main house. Close enough for work, far enough for privacy." The word privacy hung in the air between them, and Delilah felt a flash of anxiety. Was she being foolish, trusting this man? But what choice did she really have? As if reading her thoughts, Yates spoke again. "Miss Porter, I want you to know you're safe with me. When we get to the ranch, I'll introduce you to Mrs. Hargrove. She's a good woman, church-going. If you'd feel more comfortable staying at the main house—" "No," Delilah interrupted, surprising herself with the quickness of her response. "No, that won't be necessary. I've imposed enough already." Yates nodded, seeming to understand her need for independence. "Well, offer stands if you change your mind." An hour later, they approached a substantial ranch house with several outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse. A woman in her 50s emerged from the main house, shading her eyes against the morning sun. "Yates Lawson, we expected you back yesterday." Mr. Hargrove was about to send. She stopped short upon noticing Delilah. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company." "Mrs. Hargrove, this is Miss Delilah Porter," Yates said, helping Delilah down from the horse. "She's the new school teacher for Wilcox. Had some trouble on the trail, wagon caught fire in the night, lost everything." Mrs. Hargrove's face transformed with sympathy. "You poor dear, come inside this instant. You need food, proper clothes. That's mighty kind, Mrs. Hargrove," Yates interjected gently, "but Miss Porter's agreed to stay at my cabin for a spell. It's closer to town, and she's keen to see about her teaching position." Mrs. Hargrove's eyebrows rose slightly, but to her credit, she recovered quickly. "Well then, let's at least get you some proper attire and provisions. Can't have you starting your new life in Wyoming wearing nothing but a nightdress and Yates's coat, can we?" Inside the ranch house, Mrs. Hargrove proved to be a whirlwind of efficiency. Within an hour, Delilah was bathed, dressed in a simple but well-made blue calico dress. "My niece left it last visit, never did come back for it, and had eaten a hearty breakfast of eggs, bacon, and biscuits. Now then, Mrs. Hargrove said, packing a basket with food, "I've included some preserves, dried beef, coffee, and flour. Enough to tide you over a few days. And here's a spare blanket, some undergarments, and another dress. Mrs. Hargrove, I don't know how to thank you," Delilah said, genuinely moved by the woman's kindness. "Nonsense. We look after our own out here." She lowered her voice. "Now, about your arrangement with Yates. It's purely temporary," Delilah assured her quickly. "Just until I can establish myself in town." Mrs. Hargrove studied her carefully. "Yates Lawson is a good man, best ranch hand we've ever had. Honest, hardworking, never causes trouble." She hesitated. "But he keeps to himself. Lost his family in '67. Cholera took them all in one terrible week. Been on his own since he was 16. Delilah absorbed this information, feeling a pang of sympathy for the young man who had so readily offered her help. "I don't mean to pry, Mrs. Hargrove continued, "but a woman alone with a single man, even one as honorable as Yates, well, reputations are fragile things, especially for a schoolteacher." "I understand your concern," Delilah replied, "but I assure you my stay will be brief and entirely proper." Mrs. Hargrove nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Well then, I believe Yates is waiting with the wagon. Mr. Hargrove insisted you take it along with our old mare Penny. She's gentle as can be, perfect for a lady." Outside, Yates had indeed procured a small farm wagon and hitched a placid-looking brown mare to it. He changed into a clean shirt and had clearly taken the opportunity to wash up as well. "Miss Porter," he said, tipping his hat. "Ready when you are." The ride to Yates's cabin took nearly 2 hours. As they traveled, the landscape grew more wooded, with pine and aspen replacing the open grasslands of the main ranch. Finally, they rounded a bend in a narrow trail and Yates announced, "Here we are." Delilah wasn't sure what she had expected, but the sight before her took her breath away. Nestled in a small clearing, backed by a stand of tall pines, stood a cabin that could only be described as charming. Though clearly unfinished in places, the porch was only half built, and one window remained uncovered. The structure was solid and well crafted. A small corral stood nearby, and a creek bubbled past not 50 yards from the front door. "Mr. Lawson," she breathed, "you built this yourself?" He nodded, a hint of pride showing through his usual reserve. "Started it 2 years back. Work on it when I can. Been meaning to finish that porch before winter. It's beautiful. It's rough, he corrected, but she could tell her words had pleased him. Come on, let's get you settled. The interior was simple but surprisingly spacious. One large room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A door led to what Yates explained was a bedroom, though it contained only a bed frame with no mattress. "You'll take my bed," he said, gesturing to a neatly made bed in the corner of the main room. "I'll sleep in the barn till I can rig something else up." "Mr. Lawson, I couldn't possibly—" "It's decided," he said firmly. "Now, there's the water pump outside. Outhouse is behind that big pine, and I've got tools in the lean-to if you need anything. I've got to get back to work. Mr. Hargrove's short-handed with the fall roundup coming, but I'll bring supplies for dinner." Before Delilah could protest further, he was gone, leaving her alone in the cabin that had so unexpectedly become her temporary home. As the door closed behind Yates, Delilah stood in the middle of the cabin, suddenly overwhelmed by the events of the past 12 hours. Her legs gave way, and she sank onto a rough-hewn chair, tears finally flowing freely. Everything was gone. The carefully packed trunk containing her mother's china teacup, her father's pocket watch, the family Bible with generations of Porters recorded inside. Gone, too, were her teaching certificates, her letters of recommendation, the carefully planned lessons for her first term. All her clothing, her small savings of $23, even the locket containing a tiny daguerreotype of her parents, all consumed by the cruel, hungry flames. She allowed herself exactly 5 minutes of despair. Then, wiping her eyes with determined finality, Delilah Porter rose to her feet. Self-pity would not rebuild her life. Action would. First, she explored the cabin more thoroughly. Despite its unfinished state, Yates had built it with care and attention to detail. The windows, the one that was installed, anyway, was positioned to catch the morning light. The fireplace drew well when she tested it with a small fire. The furniture, though sparse, was solid and well-crafted, obviously made by hand. There was a surprising attention to comfort: a cushion on the rocking chair, a braided rug before the hearth. In the kitchen area, she found basic utensils, a cast iron skillet, a coffee pot, and a few crockery dishes. A shelf held salt, flour, coffee beans, and a small supply of dried beans and jerky. Not abundant, but enough to get by. Outside, she discovered a small garden plot, overgrown but still producing some late squash, tomatoes, and beans. A rain barrel collected water from the cabin's roof, and the creek provided a steady source of clear, cold water. The barn, little more than a lean-to with walls, housed some basic tools, a workbench, and space for 2 horses. By midday, Delilah had swept the cabin clean, organized the meager supplies, and gathered vegetables from the garden. She found fishing line and hooks in a tin box, and, remembering skills learned from her father during happier times, caught 2 small trout from the creek. When Yates returned late that afternoon, he found her sitting on the half-built porch, mending a tear in the dress Mrs. Hargrove had given her. "Miss Porter," he said, sounding surprised, "you've been busy." She set aside her sewing. "Idle hands invite melancholy," my mother always said. Wise woman. He dismounted, leading Rusty to the small corral where Penny already grazed. Brought some things from the ranch. From his saddlebags he produced a small sack of potatoes, more coffee, a loaf of bread, and most precious, a few sheets of paper, a pencil, and a small bottle of ink. "I mentioned your situation to Mr. Hargrove," Yates explained. "He suggested you might want to write to the town council in Wilcox, let them know what happened and that you'll be delayed." Delilah accepted the writing materials with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, that's very thoughtful." "Mrs. Hargrove sent these too." He handed her a bundle containing another dress, this one in a warm brown color and a woolen shawl. Said the nights get cold early up here. She's very kind. You all are." Delilah felt a lump forming in her throat and swallowed hard. Yates shifted uncomfortably, clearly unused to dealing with female emotions. "Caught some fish, I see," he said, changing the subject as he nodded toward her day's catch, which she'd cleaned and set on a flat stone. "I thought we might have them for dinner. I found some wild onions growing near the creek, and there's squash from your garden." "Our garden now," he corrected. "Least till you're settled in town." That evening they shared a simple but satisfying meal. Yates proved to be a man of few words but was a good listener. Delilah found herself telling him about growing up in St. Louis. Her father's work as a printer, her mother's death from influenza 4 years ago, and her father's passing just this past winter. "So when the advertisement for a teacher in Wyoming territory came across my father's desk last year, he saved it. After he died, I found it among his papers. It seemed like a sign." "Long way to come on a sign," Yates observed. "There was nothing left for me in St. Louis," Delilah admitted. "No family, few friends, and the memories." She trailed off. "Sometimes new places help make new memories," Yates said quietly. It was perhaps the most philosophical thing he'd said all day. "What about you?" she asked. "Mrs. Hargrove mentioned you lost your family young." A shadow passed over his face. "Cholera, I was 16. Pa had a small spread in Kansas. Nothing fancy, just enough to get by. After they died, Pa, my little sister Emily, I couldn't stay. Drifted west, worked where I could, ended up here. I'm so sorry." He shrugged, but his eyes revealed the pain he still carried. "Been 9 years now. You learn to live with it." After dinner, Yates insisted on sleeping in the barn despite Delilah's protests. "Got a perfectly good bedroll out there," he said. "Used to sleeping under the stars anyway." As she prepared for bed that night, Delilah was struck by the strangeness of her situation. 24 hours ago, she had been an independent woman with a plan, a destination, and everything she needed to start her new life. Now she was essentially homeless, dependent on the kindness of a man she barely knew, in a wilderness that seemed as vast and unknowable as her future. Yet as she lay in Yates's bed, which smelled faintly of pine and clean sweat, Delilah felt something unexpected: hope. Perhaps it was the way Yates had so matter-of-factly offered help without expectation of reward. Perhaps it was the simple beauty of the cabin he'd built with his own hands. Or perhaps it was just the quiet strength she sensed in him, a steadiness that suggested that whatever challenges lay ahead, they could be overcome. With that comforting thought, Delilah Porter fell into the deepest sleep she'd had since leaving St. Louis. Morning brought a crisp clarity to the air that hinted at the coming autumn. Delilah woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of hammering. Dressing quickly in her blue calico dress, she stepped outside to find Yates hard at work on the unfinished porch. "Good morning," she called. "You're up early." He paused, pushing his hat back from his forehead. "Sun's been up an hour already. There's coffee in the pot." "Thank you. Have you eaten?" "Not yet. Wanted to get a start on this porch. Weather report says snow possible by month's end." "Then I'll fix us some breakfast," she decided. While Yates worked outside, Delilah busied herself inside. She found some cornmeal and made johnny cakes, served with the last of Mrs. Hargrove's preserves. When she called Yates in to eat, he washed up at the outdoor pump, appearing moments later with damp hair and a clean face. "This looks mighty fine, Miss Porter," he said, eyeing the simple meal as if it were a feast. "It's the least I can do." She hesitated. "Mr. Lawson, I've been thinking. I should go to Wilcox today, speak to the town council in person. They're expecting me and I need to explain what happened." Yates nodded slowly. "Makes sense. I can take you if you'd like." I wouldn't want to keep you from your work. Got the day off. Mr. Hargrove's orders, actually. Said I should help you get settled. He glanced away, suddenly interested in his coffee cup. Besides, thought we might pick up supplies in town, things you'll need. I have no money, Delilah reminded him. Everything was in my wagon. Got some saved, he replied simply. You can pay me back when you get your first month's salary. That's very generous, but just practical, he cut her off. Can't have the town's new schoolteacher showing up with nothing but 2 dresses to her name. After breakfast, they hitched Penny to the small wagon and set out for Wilcox. The journey took just over 2 hours, during which Yates pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area's early settlers. That ridge there. Old man Jenkins claimed he found gold there in '68. Turned out to be fool's gold, but not before half the county tore up the place looking. Delilah found herself laughing more than she had in months. There was something about Yates Lawson that put her at ease, a straightforwardness, an absence of pretense that was refreshing after the social complexities of St. Louis society. Wilcox proved to be exactly as Yates had described it, small but determined. A cluster of wooden buildings arranged along a single wide street, with scattered homes radiating outward. The general store, saloon, hotel, and church were indeed the main establishments, along with a blacksmith shop, a small bank, and various other businesses. Where would I find the town council? Delilah asked as Yates helped her down from the wagon. Mayor's office is above the general store. Jameson's his name. He'll be there or at the bank, he owns both. Inside the general store, a bell tinkled as they entered. A round-faced man with spectacular whiskers looked up from behind the counter. Yates Lawson, don't often see you before cattle selling time. Morning, Mr. Higgs. This here is Miss Delilah Porter. She's your new school teacher. Mr. Higgs's face lit up. Well now, we've been expecting you, Miss Porter. Council got your letter from St. Louis last month. Children are just about driving their mothers to distraction without school to keep them occupied. I'm afraid I've had some misfortune on my journey, Delilah explained. My wagon caught fire night before last. I lost everything, including my teaching certificates and letters of recommendation. Mr. Higgs's expression fell. Oh my, that is unfortunate indeed. Mayor Jameson will want to hear about this. He's at the bank this morning. As they made their way to the bank, Delilah couldn't help noticing the curious glances directed their way. A young woman on the arm of Yates Lawson was clearly a novelty in Wilcox. Mayor Jameson proved to be a tall, austere man with a surprisingly kind smile. He listened to Delilah's story with genuine concern. A terrible welcome to our town, Miss Porter. Simply terrible, but you're here now, and that's what matters. My concern, Mr. Jameson, is that I have no way to prove my credentials. The fire destroyed everything. The mayor waved away her concern. We can write to the school board in St. Louis for copies. In the meantime, I've read your letters and you come highly recommended. The school building is ready, small but adequate, and the teacher's cottage is furnished, though modestly. When would you like me to start? Well, we had planned for next Monday, but given your circumstances, next Monday will be fine, Delilah interrupted firmly. That gives me 4 days to prepare. Mayor Jameson looked surprised but pleased. Excellent. I'll have Mrs. Jameson show you the cottage this afternoon. Actually, Yates spoke up, Miss Porter is staying at my cabin for the time being. It's closer to town than the ranch house. The mayor's eyebrows rose slightly, and Delilah felt her cheeks warm. It's a temporary arrangement, she explained quickly. Mr. Lawson kindly offered shelter after the fire. I see, said the mayor, his tone neutral but his eyes assessing. Well, the cottage will be ready whenever you are, Miss Porter. Now, about your salary, by the time they left the bank, Delilah had been officially hired as the schoolteacher of Wilcox, with a monthly salary of $35 plus the use of the cottage. Mayor Jameson had even advanced her $10 against her first month's pay, despite her protests. "Now we can get you some necessities," Yates said as they walked back toward the general store. "I can't ask you to not asking," he interrupted. "Just doing what needs doing, remember." In the general store, Mr. Higgs helped them assemble the basics: undergarments, stockings, a nightgown, toiletries, and a few household items. Yates insisted on adding a warm coat, gloves, and a proper pair of boots. "Wyoming winters are nothing to trifle with," he explained when Delilah protested the expense. Their final stop was at the dressmaker's shop, where Mrs. Finch, a cheerful woman with nimble fingers, promised to have 2 serviceable dresses ready by Saturday. "Nothing fancy," Delilah emphasized. "Just appropriate for teaching." "Of course, dear," Mrs. Finch agreed, though her measuring and note-taking suggested she had more elaborate plans. As they prepared to leave town, Mayor Jameson's wife intercepted them, insisting on showing Delilah the school building and teacher's cottage. The school was indeed small, one room with rows of rough-hewn desks, a blackboard, and a pot-bellied stove, but clean and well-maintained. The cottage, located just behind the school, was equally modest but charming, with 2 small rooms, a kitchen area, and a tiny parlor. "It's perfect," Delilah declared, genuinely pleased. After the destruction of her wagon, even these simple accommodations seemed luxurious. On the ride back to the cabin, Delilah found herself unexpectedly content. The day had gone better than she could have hoped. She had a job, a future home, and the beginnings of a new wardrobe. Most importantly, she had been accepted by the town despite her unconventional arrival. "Thank you," she said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Yates glanced at her. "For what?" "For everything. For rescuing me, for the cabin, for today." She gestured at the parcels in the back of the wagon. "I don't know what I would have done without your help." He kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Delilah said softly, "they wouldn't have, and we both know it." Yates didn't respond, but she saw his hands tighten slightly on the reins, and the tips of his ears turned red beneath his hat. That evening, as they shared another simple meal, Delilah broached a subject that had been on her mind all day. "Mr. Lawson," "Yates," he corrected. "If we're sharing a home, even temporarily, seems strange to be so formal." "Yates," she amended, feeling a peculiar flutter at the intimacy of using his given name. "I'd like to pay you rent for the cabin. It's only right." He shook his head. "No need. It's just sitting there when I'm not using it anyway. Then let me contribute in other ways. Cooking, cleaning, mending. I noticed your shirts could use some attention." He looked down at his shirt, which indeed sported several poorly mended tears. "Not much good with a needle," he admitted. "So we have an arrangement. You provide the shelter, I provide the domestic skills." Yates considered this, then nodded. "Seems fair, though I still aim to help you finish getting set up in town. The porch," Delilah suddenly remembered. "You were working on it this morning. Still needs a roof and railings. Thought I'd get to it tomorrow. Could I help? I'm stronger than I look." Yates smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his usually solemn face. "I believe you are at that, Miss Porter." "Delilah," she corrected gently. "If we're sharing a home, even temporarily, seems strange to be so formal." His smile widened at having his own words turned back on him. "Delilah," he repeated, and the way he said her name like it was something precious sent another flutter through her chest. As she prepared for bed that night, Delilah found herself thinking about the peculiar turns her life had taken. The terrible loss of her wagon, which had seemed like the end of her hopes, had instead led her here to this cabin, to to this unexpected friendship with a quiet, honorable man who built things with his hands and kept his promises. For the first time since leaving St. Louis, Delilah Porter felt as if she might actually be where she belonged. The next 4 days fell into a rhythm that felt both novel and strangely familiar to Delilah. Each morning, she woke to find Yates already outside working on the porch, splitting firewood or tending to the horses. They would share breakfast, then work together on whatever project needed attention. True to her word, Delilah proved to be a capable helper. She held boards steady while Yates hammered, mixed mud for chinking gaps in the cabin walls, and even tried her hand at simple carpentry under his patient instruction. "You're a natural," he commented when she successfully completed a set of shelves for the kitchen area. "I've always been good with my hands," she replied. "My father let me help in the print shop sometimes." In the afternoons, while Yates worked on the more challenging aspects of construction, Delilah prepared for her teaching duties. Using the paper and ink he had provided, she created lesson plans, a schedule, and rules for her classroom. Without textbooks which Mayor Jameson had promised were on order from Cheyenne, she had to rely on her memory and creativity. "I'll need to assess each child's level," she explained to Yates over dinner. "Some may have had schooling before, others none at all. Town's got about 20 children of school age," he offered. "Some from farms outside town. Jenkins boys are bright but wild. Thompson girls are quiet as mice but sharp as tacks. You know the children well," he shrugged. "Know most everybody around these parts. Not much happens in Wilcox that folks don't talk about." This reminded Delilah of something that had been bothering her. "Speaking of talk, I hope our arrangement isn't causing gossip, the way Mayor Jameson looked at us." Yates set down his fork. "Does it trouble you? What people might think?" "Not for myself," she said honestly. "I know the truth of our situation. But for you, your reputation in the community, my reputation is just fine," he interrupted. "Anyone who knows me knows I'm not the kind to take advantage." "Of course not," Delilah agreed quickly. "I never meant to suggest. I know you didn't." His expression softened. "But if you're worried, you can move into the teacher's cottage early. It's ready whenever you are." The thought of leaving the cabin with its growing comforts and Yates's steady presence gave Delilah a pang she hadn't expected. "No," she said, "I'm not ready yet. Besides, we haven't finished the porch." That earned her another of his rare, transformative smiles. On Friday, Yates returned from work at the ranch with an unexpected gift, a blackboard, small but serviceable, which Mr. Hargrove had found in his attic. "Used to belong to his children's tutor," Yates explained as he carried it into the cabin. "Thought you might want it for your classroom." Delilah ran her fingers over the smooth black surface, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "It's perfect. Please thank Mr. Hargrove for me." That evening, as they sat on the now completed porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, Delilah realized with a start that she was happy. Despite the loss of her possessions, despite the challenges ahead, she felt a contentment that had eluded her for years. "Penny for your thoughts," Yates said, his voice low in the gathering dusk. "I was just thinking how strange life can be," she replied. "A week ago, I would have said losing everything I owned was the worst thing that could happen to me. But now—" She gestured to the cabin, the porch, the peaceful scene before them. "Now I'm not so sure." Yates was silent for a long moment. "Sometimes we don't know what we need until life takes away what we thought we wanted," he finally said. The wisdom in his words surprised her. "That's rather philosophical for a cowboy," she teased gently. "Even cowboys think deep thoughts sometimes," he replied with mock seriousness. Then more soberly, Had a lot of time to think over the years. Out on the range under the stars makes a man ponder things. What things? He hesitated, and she thought he might not answer. Then, life, death. Why some folks get more than their share of suffering, whether a man can outrun his past or if it's always going to catch up to him. And what conclusions have you reached? That life ain't fair, but it goes on anyway. That death comes for everybody, so you better make peace with that. That suffering either breaks you or makes you stronger, your choice which. And that a man can run from his past, but he's better off facing it head-on. Delilah considered his words, struck by the depth beneath his quiet exterior. Have you faced your past? Yates turned to look at her, his eyes shadowed in the fading light. Getting there, he said softly. Little more each day. Saturday brought another trip to Wilcox, this time to collect Delilah's new dresses from Mrs. Finch and to show her the school once more so she could prepare for Monday. Mrs. Finch had outdone herself. The two dresses were simple but beautifully made, one in deep blue wool for winter, the other in a lighter gray cotton for warmer days. "They're lovely," Delilah exclaimed, running her fingers over the fine stitching. "But I'm afraid they're too fine for everyday teaching." "Nonsense," Mrs. Finch declared. "A school teacher should look respectable, sets a good example for the children." At the schoolhouse, Delilah arranged her new blackboard on the teacher's desk, organized what few supplies the town had provided, and generally familiarized herself with the space that would soon be her domain. Yates watched from the doorway, his expression unreadable. "What do you think?" she asked, turning to him after hanging a map of the United States on one wall. "I think Wilcox is lucky to have you," he replied simply. That evening, their last before Delilah would move to the teacher's cottage, carried a weight of expectation neither of them acknowledged. They lingered over dinner, their conversation more personal than usual. Delilah learned that Yates had a talent for drawing, though he seldom practiced it anymore. He discovered that she could play the piano and sing, skills she hoped to share with her pupils if the town could ever afford an instrument for the school. "I always wanted to learn," Yates admitted. "Music, I mean. Pa thought it was frivolous." "It's never too late," Delilah said. "I could teach you if you'd like." "Me, with these hands." He held them up large, calloused from years of ranch work. "Especially you," she insisted. "Music isn't just for fine ladies in parlors, you know." Later, as Delilah prepared for bed, she found herself reluctant for the night to end. Tomorrow she would move to the cottage, begin her new life as Wilcox's schoolteacher. It was what she had come to Wyoming for, what she had planned and dreamed of. Yet now, the prospect filled her with a strange melancholy. She stepped onto the porch where Yates sat smoking a cigarette, gazing at the stars. He stood when he saw her, quickly extinguishing the cigarette. "Sorry, should have asked if the smoke bothered you." "It doesn't," she assured him. "My father smoked a pipe. I always found the smell comforting." He nodded, and they stood in companionable silence, looking up at the vast Wyoming sky ablaze with stars. "I wanted to thank you," Delilah said finally, "for everything you've done. I don't know how I can ever repay you. Told you before not looking for payment. Even so, you've been." She searched for the right word. Kind seemed inadequate. Remarkable too forward. "A true friend," she finally settled on. Yates turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Is that what we are, Delilah, friends?" Something in his tone made her breath catch. "I hope so," she managed. "I'd like to think so." He took a step closer, and she could smell the lingering tobacco on his clothes, mixed with the scent of pine and leather that she'd come to associate with him. "And if I said I'd like us to be more than friends?" His voice was low, uncertain, so different from his usual confidence. Delilah's heart hammered in her chest. This moment felt pivotal, as if her response would set the course of her future. I'd say," she began carefully, "that I've known you only a week." 6 days, he corrected with the ghost of a smile. 6 days, she acknowledged. A very short time to know someone. Some things you know right away, he countered. Some things take time. Question is, are you willing to give it time to see where this might lead? Delilah thought of the life she'd planned independent, focused on her teaching, building a place for herself in Wilcox. Then she thought of the unexpected joy she'd found in this cabin, working alongside Yates, sharing meals and conversation, watching the sunset from a porch they'd built together. "Yes," she said finally, "I'd like that." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after a long night. He reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and took her hand in his. "Good," he said simply. "That's good." They stood like that for several minutes, hand in hand under the stars, not speaking but communicating nonetheless. When Delilah finally withdrew her hand and wished him good night, it was with a sense of anticipation rather than ending. Tomorrow would bring change, yes, but also possibility. Sunday morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect Wyoming autumn day. Delilah woke early, her mind already busy with thoughts of the move to town and her first day of teaching tomorrow. But underlying these practical concerns was a current of excitement about her conversation with Yates the night before. They had agreed to give it time, to explore the connection that had formed so quickly between them. What that meant exactly, Delilah wasn't entirely sure, but the prospect filled her with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. She found Yates in the kitchen, cooking breakfast, a rare occurrence, as this task had fallen to her during her stay. "Good morning," he said, looking up from the stove with a smile that made her stomach flutter. "Thought you might like a proper meal before heading to town." "That's very thoughtful. Can I help?" "Just sit. Coffee's hot." As they ate the substantial breakfast of eggs, bacon, and biscuits, Delilah noticed Yates seemed different this morning, more talkative, almost animated by his standards. "Thought we might attend church before taking your things to the cottage," he suggested. "Whole town will be there." "Good way to introduce you proper like." "Church?" Delilah was surprised. Yates hadn't mentioned religious observances before. "Don't go regular," he admitted, reading her expression. "But folks will expect the new schoolteacher to be there. And it would give us a reason to arrive in town together without causing talk." Delilah appreciated his thoughtfulness. "That's an excellent idea." After breakfast, they packed her few belongings into the wagon. In addition to the dresses and other items they'd purchased, Delilah now had the blackboard, some books Yates had found at the ranch house, and a few household items he insisted she take from the cabin. "Got duplicates of most of it anyway," he claimed, though she suspected this wasn't entirely true. Before departing, Delilah took a final walk through the cabin that had been her sanctuary for nearly a week. Despite its roughness and simplicity, it had begun to feel like home in a way no place had since her parents' house in St. Louis. "You're welcome back anytime," Yates said quietly from behind her, "for dinner, or just to visit, or if town life gets too confining." She turned to face him, touched by the offer. "I'd like that." The ride to Wilcox was mostly silent, but comfortably so. Delilah wore her new blue wool dress, which Mrs. Finch had indeed made beautifully, with a fitted bodice and full skirt that swished pleasingly when she walked. Yates, too, had dressed in his best, a clean white shirt, dark vest, and the least worn of his denim trousers. He'd even trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair with water. "You look very handsome," Delilah remarked, then blushed at her own boldness. "And you look beautiful," he replied simply. "Always do." The little white church in Wilcox was filled to capacity when they arrived. Heads turned as Yates escorted Delilah to a pew near the middle, and whispers followed in their wake. Delilah held her head high, nodding politely to those she recognized from her previous visits. The service was simple but heartfelt, led by Reverend Thomas, a young, earnest man with a powerful speaking voice. His sermon on community and neighborly support seemed particularly appropriate, given Delilah's recent experiences. After the service, as the congregation filed out into the churchyard, Mayor Jameson took the opportunity to formally introduce Delilah to the townspeople. "Friends and neighbors," he announced, his voice carrying across the yard, "I have the pleasure of presenting Miss Delilah Porter, who will be taking up her duties as our school teacher tomorrow morning. I trust you will all make her feel welcome in Wilcox." A murmur of approval ran through the crowd, and several mothers immediately approached, eager to introduce their children. "My Jonathan is 8, Miss Porter, and already reading chapter books. The twins, Sarah and Samuel, are 6. They've never had formal schooling, but they know their letters. Elizabeth is 10 and very good with numbers. Takes after her father." Delilah greeted each child warmly, mentally cataloging names, ages, and apparent abilities to help with her planning. Yates stood slightly apart, watching the proceedings with a small smile. When the introductions were finally complete, he approached. "Ready to get settled in your new home?" The teacher's cottage, when they arrived, had been prepared for her arrival. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, a vase of late wildflowers sat on the small table, and the bed had been made up with clean linens. "Mrs. Jameson's doing," Yates explained as they carried in Delilah's belongings. "She mentioned it yesterday." The cottage was simple but comfortable, one main room that served as parlor and kitchen, with a small bedroom off to one side. A pot-bellied stove provided heat, and a pump at the kitchen sink meant she wouldn't have to carry water from the town well. "It's lovely," Delilah declared, genuinely pleased. After the loss of her wagon, even these modest accommodations seemed luxurious. They unpacked her things quickly, finding places for each item. When everything was arranged to her satisfaction, an awkward silence fell between them. "Well," Yates said finally, "reckon you're all set." "Yes," Delilah agreed, though she felt strangely bereft at the thought of him leaving. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I should probably head back. Got work tomorrow, and it's a fair ride." "Of course." Delilah smoothed her skirt nervously. "Thank you again for everything, Yates," he nodded, reaching for his hat which he'd placed on the table. "Good luck tomorrow with the children. They'll love you." "I hope so." He moved toward the door, then stopped, turning back to face her. "Would it be all right if I called on you? Saturday evening, maybe? We could have dinner at the hotel restaurant." The question, so formal and yet so heartfelt, made Delilah smile. "I'd like that very much." Relief visibly washed over his features. "Good, that's good. Saturday, then." With a tip of his hat, he was gone, leaving Delilah alone in her new home, already looking forward to Saturday with an anticipation that should have alarmed her but somehow didn't. Monday morning brought sunshine and a flurry of activity as the children of Wilcox, dressed in their Sunday best and clutching slates or books if they possessed them, made their way to the schoolhouse. Delilah had been up since dawn, arranging the classroom, writing a welcome message on the blackboard, and calming her nerves with deep breaths and silent prayers. By 8 o'clock, 22 students ranging in age from 5 to 16 had assembled in the schoolroom. They sat at the rough wooden desks, eyes wide with curiosity as they regarded their new teacher. "Good morning, children," Delilah began, pleased that her voice sounded steady despite her racing heart. "I am Miss Porter, and I am delighted to be your teacher." And so began Delilah's career as the schoolteacher of Wilcox. The first day was exhausting but exhilarating. As she had expected, the children's abilities varied widely. Some, like 10-year-old Elizabeth Jenkins, read fluently, and worked complex arithmetic problems with ease. Others, particularly the younger ones and those from outlying farms, had received little or no formal education. By the end of the week, Delilah had established a routine that seemed to work well. She divided the children into 3 groups based on ability rather than age, rotating her attention among them throughout the day. The older students helped the younger ones during periods of independent work, and Delilah discovered that teaching benefited both parties. The younger children received the attention they needed, while the older ones reinforced their own knowledge by explaining concepts to others. The promised textbooks arrived on Wednesday, a set of McGuffey readers, a dozen arithmetic primers, and a beautifully illustrated geography book. Mayor Jameson delivered them personally, beaming with pride as if he'd written them himself. "These should help, Miss Porter." Town council voted to order more as the budget allows. Delilah thanked him profusely, already planning how to incorporate the precious books into her lessons. Each evening, she returned to her cottage tired but satisfied, spending hours preparing lessons for the next day and grading the children's work. She wrote in her journal each night, recording the day's successes and challenges, noting which students needed extra attention and which concepts had proven difficult to convey through it all. Thoughts of Yates Lawson were never far from her mind. Would he really come on Saturday as promised? Had the connection she felt been real, or merely a product of her gratitude and vulnerability after losing everything? By the time Saturday arrived, Delilah had worked herself into a state of nervous anticipation. She spent extra time on her appearance, arranging her hair in a style more elaborate than her usual teaching bun, and wearing her gray dress, which Mrs. Finch had designed with a slightly more fashionable cut than the serviceable blue wool. At precisely 6 o'clock, a knock sounded at her door. Delilah took a deep breath, smoothed her skirt one final time, and opened the door to find Yates standing on her small porch, hat in hand, looking as nervous as she felt. "Evening, Miss Porter," he said formally, then smiled and corrected himself. "Delilah." "Yates," she replied, returning his smile. "You're right on time. Man's only as good as his word," he said simply. He offered his arm, and she took it, feeling the solid strength of him through the fabric of his suit jacket, clearly his best, rarely worn judging by its stiff appearance and slightly outdated cut. The walk to the Wilcox Hotel was short but significant. To be seen together, arm in arm on a Saturday evening, was essentially a public declaration that they were courting. Delilah was acutely aware of the curious glances from townspeople they passed, the knowing smiles, the whispered comments. "Does it bother you?" Yates asked quietly, noticing her awareness of the attention. "We can go back if you'd prefer." "Not at all," she assured him, tightening her grip on his arm slightly. "I'm proud to be seen with you." The simple statement seemed to affect him deeply. His back straightened, and he walked with a confidence that made Delilah's heart swell. The hotel dining room was the finest establishment in Wilcox, which wasn't saying much, but the tablecloths were clean, the silverware polished, and the food several steps above typical ranch fare. Yates pulled out Delilah's chair with unexpected gallantry, then seated himself across from her. "How was your first week of teaching?" he asked once they'd ordered. "Challenging but wonderful," she replied honestly. "The children are eager to learn, though their abilities vary widely. And the parents have been very supportive. Whole town's been waiting for a proper school," Yates said. "Means progress, civilization, makes folks feel like Wilcox is growing into something permanent." "And what about you?" Delilah asked. "How was your week?" he shrugged. "Same as usual. Mending fences, moving cattle to winter pasture, breaking in a new colt." You make it sound so ordinary, but I'd imagine it's quite dangerous work. A hint of a smile played at his lips. Has its moments. Got thrown by that colt on Tuesday, landed hard enough to see stars. You were hurt. Concern edged her voice. Just bruised, nothing serious. He hesitated, then added more softly, though I admit it made me think. About what? About how much I wanted to keep our dinner engagement. His eyes held hers across the table, made me more careful the rest of the week. The simple statement affected Delilah more deeply than any flowery declaration might have. This man, who had faced life's hardships with stoic resilience, had been careful because he wanted to see her again. Their dinner arrived: roast beef with potatoes and carrots for Yates, chicken and dumplings for Delilah, momentarily interrupting their conversation. As they ate, they spoke of lighter topics. The upcoming town harvest festival, the latest news from Cheyenne, books they had both read and enjoyed. Delilah was struck by how easy it was to talk with Yates. Despite his quiet nature, he was well-informed and thoughtful, with opinions on everything from politics to literature. His formal education might have ended early, but his self-directed learning had continued, driven by curiosity and intelligence. After dinner, they strolled through town in the cool evening air. Yates pointed out buildings and shared snippets of local history and gossip. That's where old man Peters had his blacksmith shop before the fire of '70. And there's where Miss Elmira Godwin once slapped Sheriff Davis right in the middle of the Founders' Day picnic for proposing to her sister after courting Elmira for 6 months. Delilah laughed. You're a wealth of information about this town. People talk. I listen. He glanced down at her. Especially when they don't think cowboys pay much attention. They ended up at the small town square, where a few benches provided a place to sit and enjoy the evening. Above them, stars began to appear in the deepening twilight. Told you about my week, Yates said after they'd been sitting in comfortable silence for a few minutes. But you never really said how you're settling into the cottage. Is it comfortable? Very, Delilah assured him. Though I must admit, I miss the creek and the sound of the wind in the pines. And my snoring from the barn, he teased. She laughed. I never heard you snore. Consider yourself lucky then. Their laughter faded into another comfortable silence. Yates seemed to be gathering his thoughts, his expression turning more serious. Delilah, he began, I want you to know something. What I said last week about wanting to see where this us might lead, I meant it. More than I've meant most things in my life. Delilah's heart quickened at the earnestness in his voice. But I also understand your position here, he continued. Being the town's teacher comes with expectations. If being seen with me, a ranch hand with no formal education and not much to his name, causes problems for you, I'll understand. Yates Lawson, Delilah said firmly, turning to face him directly. Let me be perfectly clear. I care not one whit what anyone in this town or anywhere else thinks about who I choose to spend my time with. You are a good, honorable, intelligent man. Any woman would be fortunate to have your attention. The vulnerability in his eyes nearly broke her heart. Even an educated woman like yourself, especially a woman like me, she replied softly. Who else would have the sense to recognize your worth? The smile that spread across his face transformed him, erasing years of solitude and self-doubt. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, he reached for her hand. When she offered it willingly, he enfolded it in both of his, rough and calloused but infinitely gentle. Miss Delilah Porter, he said formally, would you do me the honor of allowing me to court you properly? Mr. Yates Lawson, she replied with equal formality, though her eyes sparkled with happiness. I would be delighted. As he walked her back to her cottage later that evening, Delilah felt a sense of rightness, of pieces falling into place in a way she hadn't experienced before. At her door, Yates removed his hat and held it against his chest, a gesture both respectful and endearing. "Thank you for a lovely evening," she said. "Thank you for agreeing to another," he replied. "Next Saturday. I look forward to it." He hesitated, clearly debating something with himself. Then, with a deliberateness that made her breath catch, he leaned down and placed the softest of kisses on her cheek. "Good night, Delilah," he murmured. "Good night, Yates," she whispered back. As she closed the door behind him, Delilah leaned against it, her fingers touching the spot where his lips had been. Outside her window, she heard the retreating sound of his boots on the wooden boardwalk and smiled into the darkness of her cottage. The weeks that followed established a pattern that brought increasing joy to both Delilah and Yates. Every Saturday evening, he would arrive at her cottage at precisely 6 o'clock, and they would dine at the hotel or occasionally have supper at her cottage when Delilah insisted on cooking. Sometimes they attended the infrequent entertainments Wilcox offered, a traveling magic show, a dance at the town hall, or a musical evening at the church. Other times they simply walked together, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories, dreams, and secrets. Delilah learned that Yates had a dry sense of humor that emerged more frequently as he grew comfortable with her. She discovered his passion for horses. He could talk for hours about bloodlines and training techniques, and his surprising knowledge of Shakespeare, gained from a dog-eared complete works he'd carried in his saddlebags for years. Yates, in turn, delighted in Delilah's quick mind and determined spirit. He admired her dedication to her students, the way she created innovative lessons with limited resources, and her unwavering belief that every child, regardless of background, deserved an education. On Sundays, they attended church together, sitting side by side in what had quickly become their pew. Afterward, weather permitting, they often rode to Yates's cabin for the afternoon. Delilah found she still loved the peaceful setting, and Yates continued to make improvements to the structure, adding windows, enhancing the interior, and expanding the garden plot. "Planning ahead," he explained when she commented on the extensive garden. "Wyoming winters are long. Need to put up plenty of preserves." The unstated implication that she might someday share those winters with him hung in the air between them, acknowledged but not yet addressed directly. October gave way to November, bringing the first snowfall and the Thanksgiving holiday. The town organized a communal feast at the church, and Delilah found herself seated between Yates and Mrs. Jameson, accepted without question as his partner. "You two make a handsome couple," Mrs. Jameson commented as they enjoyed pumpkin pie. "When Yates first brought you to town, I admit I had my doubts. But seeing you together these past weeks, well, it's clear as day you're well suited." Delilah blushed at the frank assessment but couldn't deny the truth of it. She and Yates were well suited, their differences complementing rather than dividing them. His practicality balanced her idealism, her expressiveness drew out his hidden depths. As the Christmas season approached, Wilcox became festive despite its frontier simplicity. Evergreen boughs decorated the storefronts, and the school children, under Delilah's direction, prepared a Christmas pageant for the town. Yates attended every rehearsal, helping build the simple sets and watching Delilah with undisguised admiration as she coaxed performances from even the shyest children. "You're amazing with them," he told her after one particularly challenging rehearsal with the youngest students. "Got more patience than job. They're trying their best," she replied. "That's all anyone can do." "Is that what you think of me too?" he asked suddenly, his tone more serious. "That I'm trying my best," Delilah studied him, sensing the importance of the question. I think you're the most honorable man I've ever known, Yates Lawson. And yes, I believe you always try your best at everything you do." The intensity of his gaze made her heart race. "Everything," he agreed softly. The night of the Christmas pageant, December 20, 1876, would forever stand out in Delilah's memory. The performance itself went remarkably well. Only one shepherd forgot his lines, and Mary only dropped baby Jesus once, thankfully onto a pile of hay rather than the hard wooden stage. Afterward, as the townspeople mingled and enjoyed refreshments, Yates approached Delilah with an unusual request. "Would you mind coming with me? There's something I'd like to show you. Now, it's quite late and there's snow predicted. It won't take long," he promised. "It's important." Curious, Delilah agreed. They bundled up against the December chill, and Yates helped her into his wagon, which was waiting outside. "Where are we going?" she asked as they left the town behind, the horses' hooves making soft, thumping sounds in the newly fallen snow. "You'll see," was all he would say. The moon was nearly full, illuminating the white landscape and making the snow sparkle like diamonds. Delilah recognized the route they were taking toward Yates's cabin, but didn't question further, content to enjoy the magical winter scene. When they arrived at the cabin, Delilah gasped in surprise. The porch was outlined with small lanterns, their warm glow casting golden light onto the snow. More lanterns lit a path to the door, and through the windows she could see the interior was similarly illuminated. "Yates, what is this?" He helped her down from the wagon, his expression a mixture of nervousness and determination. "Wanted it to look special tonight." He led her up the path and onto the porch, but instead of entering the cabin, he turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Delilah," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "That first morning, when I found you standing before your burning wagon, I told you I'd build you a better home." She nodded, remembering that moment clearly despite the chaos and despair she'd been feeling. "Since then," he continued, "I've been working on this cabin, our cabin. I hoped every spare moment, making it worthy of you." Delilah's heart began to race as the significance of his words registered. "Yates, please let me finish before my courage fails me." He took a deep breath. "I know it's not grand, not like the houses in St. Louis, but it's solid and warm, and there's room for books and music and all the things that matter to you. Room to grow." His voice softened. "Room for a family someday if you wanted." Tears filled Delilah's eyes as Yates released her hands only to reach into his pocket and withdraw a small object. When he dropped to one knee in the snow, she couldn't suppress a small gasp. "Delilah Porter," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought light and purpose and joy to days I once just endured. I love you, your strength, your kindness, your determination. I love the way you see good in everyone, even a rough cowboy with more past than prospects." He opened his hand to reveal a simple gold band with a small, perfect pearl. "Will you marry me? Let me build a life with you as strong and true as this cabin." Tears streamed freely down Delilah's face now, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes, Yates Lawson, I will marry you." His face transformed with joy as he rose and slipped the ring onto her finger. "It was my mother's," he explained softly. "The only thing of hers I kept. It's beautiful," she said, admiring the way it caught the lantern light, "and all the more precious because it was hers." "There's one more thing," Yates said, gesturing toward the cabin door. "If you're to be my wife, you should see what you're agreeing to." He opened the door and stepped aside, allowing Delilah to enter first. What she saw inside made her hands fly to her mouth in astonishment. The cabin had been transformed. The main room now contained not only the practical furniture she remembered, but also bookshelves filled with volumes, a rocking chair by the fireplace, and most incredibly a small piano against one wall. "Yates," she breathed, "how did you?" "Been saving for years," he explained, watching her reaction carefully. "Never had much reason to spend my wages. The books came from Mr. Hargrove, said his library was overflowing and he'd rather see them used than gathering dust. And the piano." He smiled shyly. "That's from the whole town." "The town?" Delilah was bewildered. "Mayor Jameson organized it. Said the school needs a piano, but it would be a shame if the teacher couldn't practice at home. It's a loan officially, but—" He shrugged. "Reckon it's a wedding present, really. They knew about your proposal. Had to ask permission from the school board to keep you on if we married. Some places don't allow married women to teach, you know." Delilah was deeply touched by the thought he'd put into every aspect of this moment. Not only had he prepared this beautiful home for her, but he'd ensured she could continue the work she loved. "And they agreed?" she asked, though the piano's presence answered the question. "Said they'd be fools to lose the best teacher Wilcox has ever had, married or not." His eyes twinkled. "Course, you're also the only teacher Wilcox has ever had, but I didn't point that out." Delilah laughed, then sobered as the full reality of what was happening washed over her. "We're getting married," she said wonderingly. "If you'll have me," Yates confirmed, suddenly looking uncertain again despite her earlier acceptance. In answer, Delilah stepped forward and placed her hands on his chest. Rising on tiptoe, she pressed her lips to his in their first real kiss, a gentle, tender meeting that nonetheless contained the promise of all the passion to come. When they separated, Yates's eyes were dark with emotion. "I love you, Delilah Porter," he whispered, resting his forehead against hers. "And I love you, Yates Lawson," she replied. "More than I ever thought possible." Outside, snow began to fall gently, dusting the porch and the lanterns with white, creating a cocoon of privacy around the little cabin. Inside, the fire crackled warmly in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls as Yates and Delilah spoke of their future together, making plans and dreams that would carry them through the years to come. From the ashes of Delilah's wagon, something far more precious had emerged, a love as sturdy and enduring as the home Yates had built for her, a home they would now share for the rest of their lives. The wedding of Yates Lawson and Delilah Porter took place on New Year's Day, 1877, in the white clapboard church of Wilcox. Despite the winter chill, the church was filled to capacity not just with townspeople but with ranch hands from Double Creek and surrounding properties, all eager to witness the union of the respected foreman and the beloved schoolteacher. Delilah wore a dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Finch had labored over for weeks, refusing payment and declaring it her wedding gift. Yates, almost unrecognizable in a new black suit, waited at the altar with an expression of mingled terror and joy that brought tears to the eyes of even the most stoic cowboys present. Mrs. Hargrove had arranged flowers brought at great expense from Cheyenne, and the school children, under the direction of Elizabeth Jenkins, sang a hymn as Delilah walked down the aisle on Mayor Jameson's arm, the mayor having offered to give her away in the absence of her father. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Thomas began, his young face solemn with the importance of the occasion, "we are gathered here in the sight of God and this company to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple but deeply moving. When it came time for the vows, Yates's strong, steady voice carried clearly through the church as he promised to love, honor, and cherish Delilah for all the days of his life. Delilah's response was equally firm, her eyes never leaving his as she pledged herself to him completely. By the power vested in me, Reverend Thomas finally proclaimed, I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. He smiled at Yates. You may kiss your bride. The kiss that followed was restrained but tender, a public affirmation of the private love they shared. As they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Lawson for the first time, the church erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration continued at the town hall, where tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by every household in Wilcox. There was dancing to the music of a three-piece band from Cheyenne, another extravagance arranged by the Hargroves, and so many well wishes that Delilah's cheeks ached from smiling. Happy, Mrs. Lawson, Yates whispered during a rare quiet moment as they stood together watching the festivities. Deliriously, she confirmed, leaning into his solid strength. And you, Mr. Lawson? More than I deserve, he replied, his arm tightening around her waist. Later that night, after the well-wishers had seen them off with more cheers and good-natured ribbing, Yates drove the wagon toward their cabin through the crisp winter night. Snow had fallen the previous day, covering the landscape in a pristine white blanket that gleamed in the moonlight. Reminds me of the night I proposed, Yates commented as they approached the cabin, which was once again lit with lanterns. Who did all this? Delilah asked, gesturing to the welcoming lights. We've been at the wedding all day. Yates smiled mysteriously. Mr. Hargrove might have arranged for some of the hands to come by and get things ready. Wanted our first night home to be special. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Delilah deeply. The community had embraced their union with such warmth and support, making what could have been a lonely occasion for two orphans into a celebration surrounded by a family they had found rather than been born into. Inside, the cabin was warm and inviting. A fire crackled in the hearth, the bed was made with fresh linens, and someone had placed a bouquet of hothouse flowers on the table, an unimaginable luxury in Wyoming in January. Welcome home, Mrs. Lawson, Yates said softly, closing the door behind them. It's perfect, Delilah whispered, overcome by the moment, by the beauty of their home, by the knowledge that they were now husband and wife, by the love she felt for this man who had come to her rescue on what had seemed the worst day of her life. Yates helped her remove her coat, his hands lingering on her shoulders. Are you tired from the day's excitement? Would you like to rest? The consideration in his voice, the careful way he was giving her space if she needed it, only made Delilah love him more. But rest was the furthest thing from her mind. No, she said, turning to face him. I'm not tired at all. The look that passed between them was one of perfect understanding. In that moment, all the restraint they had maintained during their courtship, the proper behavior, the careful distance, dissolved in the certainty of their commitment to one another. Yates drew her into his arms, and this time when he kissed her, there was no audience to consider, no need for propriety. This kiss spoke of desire long held in check, of promises now to be fulfilled, of a future to be written together. That night, as snowflakes drifted past the windows and the fire cast golden light across the room, Yates and Delilah discovered each other fully for the first time, their bodies expressing what words could only approximate the depth of their love, the joy of their union, the wonder of finding in each other the home they had both sought for so long. In the quiet aftermath, as they lay entwined beneath the quilts, Yates traced gentle patterns on Delilah's bare shoulder. I never thought I'd have this, he confessed quietly. After my family died, I figured I was meant to be alone, safer that way. Delilah propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face in the firelight. Safer. Can't lose what you don't have, he explained simply. Saw what losing Ma and Emily did to Pa before he went too. Didn't want to risk that kind of pain again. "What changed your mind?" she asked softly. He smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You did. Standing there in your nightdress, watching everything you owned burn to ashes and still holding your head high, made me realize some things are worth the risk." Delilah kissed him then, pouring into the gesture all the love she felt for this man who had been brave enough to open his heart again despite his fears. "I promise you won't regret it," she whispered against his lips. "I know," he replied, drawing her closer. "Best decision I ever made." Winter passed in a blur of contentment for the newlyweds. Delilah continued teaching, while Yates managed his duties at Double Creek Ranch, returning each evening to their cabin where they shared meals, conversation, and the simple pleasures of building a life together. On weekends, they often worked side by side on further improvements to the cabin. Yates taught Delilah basic carpentry, and together they built additional shelves, a larger table for the kitchen, and a chest of drawers for their growing collection of belongings. True to his word, Yates began taking music lessons from Delilah, his large, calloused hands surprisingly deft on the piano keys. He was a dedicated student, practicing in the evenings while Delilah graded her pupils' work. "You're making remarkable progress," she told him one night in March as he successfully completed a simple tune. "Got a good teacher," he replied with a wink. "Heard she's the best in the territory." Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers and the busy season on the ranch. Yates often left before dawn and returned after dark, the demands of calving season keeping him working long hours. Delilah, understanding the rhythms of ranch life, made sure hot meals awaited him regardless of the hour, and sometimes rode out with his lunch if the work kept him close to their home. It was during one such visit in late April that Delilah first experienced the dizziness that would later confirm her suspicions. She had ridden out to the south pasture where Yates was mending fences, carrying a basket with sandwiches, apple pie, and coffee. As she dismounted, the world tilted alarmingly, and she would have fallen had Yates not been quickly at her side. "Whoa there," he said, concern evident in his voice as he steadied her. "You all right? Just a little dizzy," she assured him. "It's past now." But his brow remained furrowed with worry. "You've been looking pale these past weeks. Maybe you should see Doc Wilson next time you're in town." Delilah agreed, though privately she was beginning to suspect the cause of her symptoms. The missed monthly cycle, the sudden aversions to certain foods, the unexplained fatigue all pointed to a possibility that filled her with equal parts joy and trepidation. A week later, her suspicions were confirmed by Doc Wilson, a gruff but kind physician who had been serving Wilcox and the surrounding area for nearly 20 years. "Congratulations, Mrs. Lawson," he said after a brief examination. "You're about 2 months along by my estimation. Baby should arrive late November provided all goes well." Delilah thanked him, her mind already racing ahead. A baby. Their baby. How would Yates react? They had spoken of children, of course, but vaguely, as a someday possibility rather than an imminent reality. She decided to prepare a special dinner to share the news. That evening, she made Yates's favorite meal, venison steak, potatoes, and apple pie, and wore her best dress, the blue one Mrs. Finch had made when she first arrived in Wilcox. Yates noticed the special preparations as soon as he entered the cabin. "What's the occasion?" he asked, washing up at the basin by the door. "Can't a wife prepare a nice meal for her hard-working husband without an occasion?" Delilah replied innocently. He eyed her suspiciously, but didn't press the issue. Throughout dinner, Delilah found herself growing increasingly nervous. What if Yates wasn't ready? What if the responsibility of a child was more than he wanted to take on? Finally, as they sat together after the meal enjoying coffee, or in Delilah's case, tea she had quietly given up coffee when the smell began to nauseate her. She gathered her courage. "Yates," she began, her voice not quite steady, "I have something to tell you." He set down his cup, giving her his full attention. "I'm listening." "I saw Doc Wilson today." She took a deep breath. We're going to have a baby. In November." For a moment, Yates sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, a smile spread across his face, not his usual reserved smile, but a wide, unguarded grin that transformed his features. "A baby," he repeated, as if testing the word. "Our baby." Delilah nodded, relief washing over her at his evident joy. "Are you happy?" In answer, Yates rose from his chair and pulled her to her feet, enfolding her in a gentle embrace. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he murmured against her hair. Then he leaned back, his hands moving to rest lightly on her still flat stomach. "Hello in there," he said softly. "I'm your pa." The simple gesture, so full of tenderness and acceptance, brought tears to Delilah's eyes. "You'll be a wonderful father," she told him, her voice thick with emotion. "Going to try my best," he agreed seriously. Then his expression turned concerned. "How are you feeling? Should you be resting more? Do we need to make changes to the cabin?" Delilah laughed at the rapid-fire questions. "I'm fine, just a little tired sometimes. And yes, we'll probably want to start thinking about a nursery, but we have time." Yates nodded, his mind clearly already planning. "The small room off the bedroom, we could convert that. It's not big, but it would be perfect for a cradle and some shelves." "That sounds lovely," Delilah agreed. That night, as they lay together in bed, Yates's hand rested protectively over Delilah's stomach, a gesture that would become familiar in the months ahead. They spoke quietly of the future, of their hopes for their child, of the family they were creating together. "Boy or girl doesn't matter to me," Yates said. "Just want a healthy baby and a healthy you." "I was thinking," Delilah said hesitantly, "if it's a boy, perhaps we could name him after your father, and if it's a girl, maybe after my mother." Yates was silent for a moment, and Delilah feared she'd upset him by bringing up painful memories. But when he spoke, his voice was steady though filled with emotion. "Samuel Lawson," he said, naming his father. "And your mother was Margaret," Delilah replied, though everyone called her Maggie. "Samuel or Margaret Lawson," Yates tested the names. "Good, strong names with history. I like that." As spring gave way to summer, Delilah's condition became increasingly apparent. The school board, true to their word, had no objection to her continuing to teach, though they suggested she might want to end the school year early and resume in the fall after the baby's arrival. "The children need consistency," Delilah argued during a meeting in June. "I can teach through the end of July as planned. Then Mrs. Thompson can take over for the fall term as my replacement. That gives the children time to adjust to the transition." The board agreed, impressed as always by Delilah's thoughtfulness regarding her pupils' welfare. Privately, Yates expressed concern about her working so late in her pregnancy, but he knew better than to suggest she was incapable of fulfilling her duties. "Just promise you'll tell me if it gets to be too much," he said one evening as he rubbed her increasingly sore back. "I promise," she agreed, leaning into his strong hands. "But I'm pregnant, not ill. Women have been having babies while continuing to work since the beginning of time." "Not all women are carrying my child," he countered. "That makes yours the most important baby in the history of the world, far as I'm concerned." Delilah laughed at his protectiveness, but was touched by it nonetheless. Throughout her pregnancy, Yates was attentive without being smothering, concerned without being controlling. He took on additional chores without being asked, ensuring Delilah didn't have to carry heavy water buckets or chop wood for the stove. The nursery progressed steadily under his skilled hands. He built a cradle from pine, its gentle curves sanded smooth as silk, then fashioned a rocking chair that he presented to Delilah on her birthday in July. For those late nights with the little one, he explained as she ran her hands over the beautifully crafted piece. It's perfect, she told him, genuinely awed by his craftsmanship. I don't know how you find the time for all this with your work at the ranch. Make time for what matters, he said simply. In August, with school finished for the summer, and Delilah's pregnancy advancing into its 6th month, they enjoyed a period of relative tranquility. The baby's movements were strong now, often visible as ripples across Delilah's expanding abdomen. Yates was fascinated by these signs of life, spending evening hours with his hand resting on her belly, waiting for the next kick or roll. "Got a lively one in there," he commented one night after a particularly vigorous movement. "Probably takes after its mama." "I beg your pardon," Delilah retorted with mock indignation. "I am the picture of calm and restraint." "Sure you are," he agreed, eyes twinkling. "Just like that time you nearly took my head off for suggesting the school board might be right about ending the term early." "That was different," she protested, then laughed as she recognized the truth in his teasing. "All right, perhaps our child has inherited my passionate nature." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Yates assured her, pressing a kiss to her forehead. As autumn approached, bringing with it cooler temperatures and the first hints of changing leaves, Delilah found herself increasingly uncomfortable. Her back ached constantly, her ankles swelled if she stood for too long, and sleep became elusive as finding a comfortable position grew nearly impossible. Yates, ever attentive, created a system of pillows and supports that helped somewhat, and took to reading aloud in the evenings both to Delilah and to the baby when restlessness kept her awake. "Think the little one can hear me?" he asked one night after finishing a chapter from Treasure Island, one of his favorite books. "Doc Wilson says babies can hear before they're born," Delilah confirmed. "He or she will know your voice when they arrive." The thought seemed to please Yates enormously. From that night on, he made a point of speaking directly to Delilah's belly each evening, sharing the events of his day or imparting what he considered essential wisdom for his child. "Horses can sense fear," he informed her stomach seriously one evening. "So always approach them with confidence, even if you have to fake it." Another night, "Never play cards with a man who claims he rarely wins. Either he's lying or he's not paying attention, and either way you'll lose your money." These one-sided conversations invariably made Delilah smile, offering glimpses into the kind of father Yates would be: practical, honest, and deeply invested in his child's well-being. November arrived with an early snowfall that blanketed the landscape in white. Delilah, now in her final weeks of pregnancy, found herself confined mostly to the cabin, her body too unwieldy for comfortable travel through the snow. Yates grew increasingly anxious as her due date approached, making sure the path to the road was always clear in case they needed to fetch Doc Wilson quickly. "Baby will come when it's ready," Delilah reminded him as he checked for the 3rd time that day that the horse and wagon were prepared for immediate departure. "Just want to be sure everything's ready when the time comes," he replied, unembarrassed by his obvious concern. The time came, as it happened, during the early hours of November 24, 1877, nearly a year to the day after Yates had proposed in this same cabin. Delilah woke to an unfamiliar pain that started in her back and wrapped around to her abdomen. At first she tried not to wake Yates, knowing he had been working particularly hard to finish his ranch duties before the baby arrived. But as the pains increased in intensity and frequency, she finally shook him gently. "Yates," she whispered, "I think it's time." He was instantly alert, sitting up and reaching for his clothes before her words had fully registered. "The baby's coming, are you sure?" Another contraction answered his question, making Delilah gasp and reach for his hand. "Quite sure," she managed once it had passed. What followed was a blur of activity. Yates helped Delilah into a comfortable position, banked the fire to ensure the cabin would stay warm, then hitched the wagon in record time to fetch Doc Wilson from town. He was clearly torn about leaving her, even briefly. "I'll be fine," she assured him, though another contraction was building. "First babies often take their time. Just hurry back." The hours that followed were the longest of Delilah's life. The pain was more intense than she had imagined, and despite Doc Wilson's calm presence and Yates's unwavering support, there were moments when she feared she couldn't endure it. But endure she did, drawing strength from Yates's steady encouragement and her own determination to bring their child safely into the world. Finally, as the first light of dawn filtered through the cabin windows, the cry of a newborn filled the room, strong, indignant, and perfect. "You have a daughter," Doc Wilson announced, placing the tiny, wriggling bundle on Delilah's chest after cutting the cord. "A fine, healthy girl." Delilah looked down at the red-faced infant, her daughter, their daughter, with a love so overwhelming it took her breath away. Beside her, Yates seemed frozen in wonder, his eyes fixed on the tiny life they had created together. "Margaret," Delilah whispered. "Margaret Emily Lawson." The addition of Yates's sister's name was spontaneous but felt right. His eyes met hers, filled with gratitude and a love that matched her own. "Hello, Maggie," he said softly, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the baby's cheek. "We've been waiting for you." Later, after Doc Wilson had departed with promises to check on them the next day, and Delilah had been helped into a clean nightgown and fresh bedding, the new family of three shared their first quiet moments together. Maggie, now fed and swaddled, slept peacefully in the cradle Yates had crafted months before. Yates sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Delilah, both of them gazing at their daughter with identical expressions of awe. "She's perfect," he murmured, "just like her mother." "She has your chin," Delilah observed, "and I think she'll have your eyes. They're already darkening." "Poor child," Yates joked weakly, though his voice was thick with emotion. "Beautiful child," Delilah corrected, leaning into his strength. "The most beautiful child in the world." They sat in silence for a few moments, absorbing the reality of the new life that had joined theirs, the family they had become. Then Yates spoke, his voice soft but steady. "A year ago, I promised to build you a better home than the wagon that burned. Didn't know then that home would come to mean so much more than a structure." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You and Maggie, you're my home now, no matter where we are, and you're ours," Delilah replied, turning to meet his gaze. "The home of our hearts." Outside, the sun rose fully over the Wyoming landscape, casting golden light through the cabin windows. Inside, Yates and Delilah Lawson held each other close, their daughter sleeping peacefully nearby, their love a shelter stronger than any walls, their future stretching before them like an open road filled with promise. From the ashes of a burned wagon had risen not just a cabin, but a family bound together by love, strengthened by adversity, and blessed beyond measure. In the years to come, the Lawson family would face challenges and celebrate triumphs, would welcome another child, Samuel Yates, born 2 years after his sister, and would remain fixtures in the growing community of Wilcox. Delilah would eventually return to teaching, and Yates would save enough to purchase his own small ranch adjacent to Double Creek. But on that November morning in 1877, all of that lay in the future. For now, it was enough to be together, to be whole, to be home. The end.